Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Healthy Indoors Show. I'm your host, Bob Krell, publisher and founder of Healthy Indoors Magazine. And thank you for joining us today on Earth Day 2021, the 51st Earth Day. Um, our show, not coincidentally, will be getting into some of the background history of Earth Day and a lot of topics that outdoor centric. I know we always focus on the indoor environments, but certainly the indoor environment and the outdoor environment are not detached, right? They're not mutually exclusive. In fact, a lot of what we've been seeing in the outdoor environments over the past several years have had massive effects on our indoor environments. So our guest today is president of Tom Murray Environmental Consulting. He is a sustainability expert who spent 44 plus years at the United States Environmental Protection Agency. He built his career around finding sustainable solutions through public-private partnerships with various industry sectors such as healthcare, the utility sector, and the automotive industry. He is also a contributor to Healthy Indoors magazine, offering his views in the sustainability snippets column. I'd like to have you all welcome our guest, Tom Murray. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing well, Bob. Happy Earth Day to everyone.
Yeah, great to see you here. Love to have you. You know, join us today. I mean, you were on the show last year, and we had an opportunity to have a lot of discussions about environmental topics. And for those of you who haven't been following Tom's column for the past few years, he's been writing the sustainability snippets column for Healthy Indoors magazine, which I love it. It's one of my favorite things in the magazine. I'll be honest. So it's just great to have you here today. Not coincidentally, we invited you on for Earth Day.
Good.
So I guess you in the intro, we mentioned that you had 44 plus years at the EPA, which is a long run. You started there back right after its inception, correct?
I did. I mean, let me take us back if I can, put us
Sure.
all in the Wayback Machine a little bit and go back to the 1960s, 1970s and the original Earth Day, because I think a lot of people might not know that history. It was, if you go back into that time period, most of the newspapers you would read would be all about the Vietnam War. There's a lot of protests going on at the time. And every once in a while, you'd see an environmental column pop up with fish kill here, oil spill there. For those of you in Ohio, you might remember when the Cuyahoga River caught fire, and that was 1969. Rachel Carson had come out with her Silent Spring book in 1962 and sort of raised the awareness a little bit. But even though we were having a lot of these environmental issues going on, nobody really was doing much about it. And that included our friends over on Capitol Hill, except for one man. And that one man was Senator Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin, a Democrat. And he was trying to get colleagues there on the Hill to pick up the banner and try to come out with some legislation to figure out how we can deal with some of these environmental insults. And it was just going nowhere. And so he was watching television one night and he saw the Vietnam protests on TV. And he thought to himself, how can I grab that kind of enthusiasm shown by all of these young people, all these college students? How could I capture that and turn it around and have it focused on environmental issues? So he decided to go for it. He contacted an activist out in California by the name of Dennis Hayes, who had been involved in a lot of the Vietnam protests. And they worked together and they decided, well, what the heck? We're going to try to put together a day in the spring of 1970. We're going to put it in April between spring break and final exams so that the college kids can participate. And we're going to call it Earth Day. And they had absolutely no idea what was going to happen, but a lot of advertisements, a lot of outreach. The day came and they were absolutely blown away. People, young, old, communities grabbing brooms, picking up trash, doing what they could, and it really captured the headlines. And a couple things came from that, of course. In that same year, 1970, two federal agencies were formed by Nixon, who was president at the time, Republican. One was NOAA, which came into view in October, and then on December 7th, the Environmental Protection Agency was actually formed in DC. And then, of course, Earth Day itself continued on every day since then. And Bob mentioned this as the 51st celebration of Earth Day. It's a global event now. And I think that over the next couple of years, we're going to see some wonderful things coming from it. We do every year. So it's that's how it all got started.
I actually, interestingly enough, I remember the first Earth Day. I'll date myself a little. I was in sixth grade then, and it was kind of a big deal. We were still, 1970. We were kind of hippie-ish, wearing our bell bottoms and doing all that stuff. And I believe we were out like picking up trash on the street or something.
Oh yeah.
And it was, I had no idea what we were looking at, but I did at that point. I took notice of the fact that there were some rivers on fire. That wasn't a
Yeah,
good thing.
we had a few, and what was interesting, once EPA got started, I joined EPA in June of 1971,
Mhm.
and after Nixon went ahead and established it, Congress suddenly woke up and said, our president has just put this regulatory agency out there, and it really doesn't have many authorities upon which it could base a lot of its actions. There was just, I think there was an 1899 Rivers and Harbors Act or something. It was about the only authority. So over the course of the next several years, there was just a whole bunch of statutes that came off the Hill: Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, all the way up to the Toxic Substances Control Act, Superfund, and everything else. And it was really interesting as the agency came together, because it started as an amalgamation, if you will, of existing organizations, from small organizations like the Federal Water Pollution Control Administration to NASA, because they were looking at using remote sensing and water quality and quantity issues. And so you can imagine the whirlwind it was like, bringing together not only all of those different organizations and making them work, but also in responding to the ever-changing landscape of statutory authorities. And we were lucky to have a very good first administrator, Bill Ruckelshaus, who somehow or other made it all happen. And it was great fun. As new statutes came on, people in the agency would sort of migrate over to the organization that they thought was a better fit for them academically and professionally. And we just grew. And of course, the folks in the regulatory community side of it weren't very happy.
Right.
Life was a little bit challenging for them and for us. And we lived in a world of permitting and compliance and enforcement, and standard setting, and that kind of stuff. And we visited the courts quite often. But we managed to move the needle, and that was what we were expected to do. And things started moving out.
Well, I mean, you mentioned, because you were there just shortly after the inception, right? You joined the EPA about 6 months after it was created.
Right.
So that was, I mean, in the early days, the original administrator, William Ruckelshaus, I mean, he had a challenge, right? He was herding cats. I mean, because
He was.
it wouldn't have
It
been
was
easy.
amazing. Well, he assembled a very good team. And I mean, we literally had meetings, I can remember, where we were sitting around almost like we're doing right now with Zoom. But back then it was, I don't know how they did it, but we were looking at various faces from around the 10 different regions that EPA had. And we were sitting there talking about the design of the logo for the agency. I mean, that's how far back, and how we had to go back to bare bones. And of course, he came right out of the blocks and started putting pressure on industry to remove certain chemicals from the environment. And it was amazing. And he came back actually for a second run at it. He was an administrator a second time. And both times he was just a remarkable man to work for.
It was interesting too, because I think our mindset, it took a while, but there was a definite mindset change in this country. I mean, I can remember when I was a kid, it wasn't uncommon for people to throw trash and bottles right out of the window of their car when they're driving down the road. That was like almost considered normal.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, not in
Yeah.
my family. My father would broke my hand, but I mean, but I used to see people do that all the time. And I remember there was that ad campaign that was on TV at the time, again, early days, right? Probably 71, 72, where they had the Native American chief sitting on his horse
Oh
alongside
yeah.
the road. And,
Yeah.
and to me, that's still an impactful little segment today, I think, looking at that.
Yeah. We actually had a logo. We had a little, was he a little bear or something? He never stuck around, but we had a logo like that for EPA. But it's interesting though, Bob, because a lot of the mindset started to change most dramatically in the early 1990s. Like I mentioned, there were a lot of statutes that we drew our authority from, most of them regulatory in nature. But in 1990, we actually at EPA worked with the Hill to pass what was probably one of the smallest statutes, but one of the mightiest. It was the Pollution Prevention Act. And it brought into the conversation things like environmentally preferable purchasing. And in other words, buying things that were good for the environment. It really brought the whole recycling program to life. It brought, as you were mentioning a moment ago, people began to understand that their actions had consequences with respect to how they treated their waste. And it really started changing there was sort of a pollution prevention movement that came into play. And industry started to look at it and looked at us a lot differently than they had before. I can remember.
How so? How so?
Well, I can remember one of the largest automotive manufacturers back then actually came in and visited with me and my staff. And we were somewhat shocked when the question they asked us is, we would like your help in finding a way to green our supply chain. That we knew that a lot of our suppliers were not as environmentally conscious as we would like them to be, but we don't think we can do this ourselves, and we need your help. So we started working with them and actually formed a program called the Green Suppliers Network, and that is still going on today, where they're trying to work with their suppliers, and it's been extremely valuable for them in terms of not only their environmental footprint, but also economically for them. We also had a visit from the healthcare. They came in and they said, we got a problem. We deal with mercury. We want to get mercury out. We know that it's a difficult thing to do. We need your help. And so we worked in a public-private partnership with them. And you're hard pressed now to find mercury in any of the medical practices because they found another and a better way. Same thing happened with the utility industry. So the whole conversation sort of went from an end of pipe conversation to a source conversation, and from a cradle to grave conversation to a cradle to cradle conversation. So it was really a mindset change, and it really propelled industry forward on their own, which was, I think, extremely valuable.
So EPA, from the way you're recalling it, it basically did a lot that wasn't just strictly in regulatory in nature, right? So there was some collaborative work with industry, which I wasn't really that well aware of.
I mean, when you talk to a lot of people about EPA, they'll tell you right off the bat, EPA is a regulatory agency, and it was designed that way and it's functioned that way. But we also found out that as long as we had the statutory authority that we could draw our efforts from, and that being the Pollution Prevention Act was one of the primary ones, that public-private partnerships had a lot of value. And it provided us opportunities to bring together people from different federal agencies to work issues with industry. We worked with communities. In my last several years there, we worked a lot with communities to find ways of working together, which was a really odd thing to think about back then. But we actually brought agencies together to work together with community organizations, and it really had a lot of value, a lot of benefit.
I mean, I think it's important, right? Because that's the carrot and stick approach, right? Comparing the two. And so, do you feel that in part those efforts were able to maybe steward some of the corporate community into doing this on more of a voluntary basis, and really trying to view their corporate sustainability practices?
Yes, but I would phrase it this way. In the 1990s, about maybe mid through the 1990s, many of these businesses, many of whom we were working with, began to realize that being a good environmental performer was actually part of the business case. They found that by actually selling products or doing or conducting processes or whatever that were better for the environment, it worked well for them economically. And what's very interesting about that is that you started hearing words like corporate social responsibility pop up, and over the years, it's really become more of a sustainability discussion at this point. Sustainability is sort of the word that most people use. And what's really interesting, and I've told this to a lot of young people that I talk to, is that if you go now to some of the major corporations in this country and you look at the C-suite, you now see corporate sustainability officers sitting next to all the other officers at the board table. It's become a big thing, and that's not just here in America, but it's become globally a big thing. So, and that's all good.
But I mean, that's sort of a paradigm shift. But I mean, it's a result of a paradigm shift in the general public's views, right? Because I mean,
Yeah.
back in the day, again, back in the 70s, 60s, we were all about chemicals making the world better, and throwing, we were kind of going in that direction, and
Yeah.
basically limitless resources, and
And I think that still holds. I mean, we're all chemicals, right? We use chemicals, we are chemicals.
sure.
It's just that we want to make sure that we're using the ones that are good for us and not using the ones that are going to cause harm. But I think a lot of people, in the beginning, they all thought that if it was an environmental product, it probably didn't work. Or they thought if it's an environmental product, it's probably going to cost me more. But we got through that really just through a lot of tenacity and good advertising, working with industry. We're to now, I think there's an expectation among folks that, I want something that is better for me, better for the house. On the indoor air areas, Bob, that you're involved in so much, we know that what we're putting down now is a lot better for us in the environment, but still doing the job that it was originally created to do. So there's been a complete paradigm shift there, and I think this younger generation coming up has really embraced it. I mean, absolutely embraced it.
Well, and you think about it too, and you're right in that here at Healthy Indoors, we spend most of our time in our discussions and efforts on the indoor environments,
Right.
or around the built indoor environments. But the reality is they're not detached from the outdoor world, and that's why we recognize that early on, and that's why we've always talked about sustainability issues, and the outdoor environment, of course, affects the indoor environment, right?
Sure.
It's critically important, you can't separate the two. So certainly I think it's all really a common issue of how we're going to have a healthy environment in general, indoors and outdoors, for us all to thrive and survive in.
It is, and I always tell people is that it's all system. I mean, back in the early days when we first got started, it was all about ecosystems. We don't usually use that term that much anymore,
Right.
but that's what it is. I mean, everything that we do, whether we're doing it in the water, medium, air, or if we're dealing with pesticides or other toxic chemicals or whatever, it's all part of a system. Climate change is all part of a system. So if you try to dwell too much on one facet of it, a lot of times you get sort of wrapped around the axle a little bit. You sort of need to keep the communication open with all facets of it.
I just wanted to remind everyone out in our virtual studio audience, we have quite a few people logged in with us today. Shortly, usually at 12:35 ish, right? we're fluid here. Somewhere between 12:30 and 12:35, we'll actually open up your ability to turn your cameras on and jump in and actually post some questions, and we'll moderate those. But we'd like you to start thinking about questions you'd like to pose to Tom and or me, and we'd like to entertain those as part of our discussion as we move this conversation forward. But Tom, you touched on climate change there. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on it. I mean, in my editorial that I just penned actually today for the April issue, I was lamenting on the fact that it seems like we lost some valuable time, in the past 4 years. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think a lot of people feel that way, Bob, and I'm also one of them. I mean, I've watched as programs that I had helped put together have sort of been put to rest a little bit over the last few years. But I don't know that it is as bad as one might think. And let me just offer a few thoughts on that of things that have occurred that I think might give us a little bit more spirit on where we're going with climate change. The first we've talked about a little bit already is the corporate side of things. Um, Corporations really haven't slowed down that much during the last 4 or 5 years in terms of their sustainability efforts. They all have sustainability strategies, some stretching out 15 years or so. A lot of it, if you look at the automotive industry in particular, they're going gung ho. I mean, a lot of them are announcing right now they're going to all electric vehicle fleets. So they have been carrying the water, all this time and doing great things. The utility industry, we're seeing a lot more in the renewable energy, more windmills, more solar. Those industries have just flourished over the last 4 or 5 years. And more people now, both in community level and industrial level, are using renewable energy. So that's a good thing. I think a lot of people like myself, people who were in the Obama administration, left then, they never stopped working. I've never stopped working. And a lot of people have been sort of keeping the embers lit behind closed doors or with other organizations over the last few years and are finding their way back into the limelight. I think Gina McCarthy, for example, has moved into the White House now. She was our administrator not that long ago. And I think a couple other things. The kids. I've had the opportunity to spend some time with some high school kids who are looking to their future and where they want to go. And they're extremely passionate about that. And they understand climate change. And unlike us, I think when we were coming through, we were passionate, certainly. But this younger generation is not afraid to put it all out there. They get out there, they'll be on the streets with the placards and the stuff, sort of like the original Earth Day kind of concept. And really, I have a lot of faith that they are going to move things forward. And then the final thing, which is sort of a very ironic and odd thing, is that the pandemic itself has actually opened our eyes a bit, given us perspective. As things slowed down, carbon emissions went down. People in Venice were able to see into the canals and actually see things swimming in the canals. But it showed that if you were to reduce activities, the environment would be resilient enough to respond to it. Now, we know that as we're coming out of the pandemic, a lot of that's going to come back online. But the hope is that we'll come back with that perspective, driving sort of a new normal. So yes, it's been sort of lousy when you look at it, but I think we've got some horses out there now to move it forward and move it forward quickly. And I tell everybody on the call, watch out for the kids. Your history will show that they're going to really pick up this ball and run with it.
Well, I mean, I'm heartened to see that the climate change topics have been elevated to cabinet level status now in the United States, which and as we spoke about in the pre-show, two different positions, one for the dealing with domestic, one dealing
Right.
with the global, which I are clearly distinctly different issues, right?
Right.
You're facing them both.
Absolutely, absolutely. You need to have both, and they all they work together as well. And you need to. I mean, a lot of people, when they talk about climate change, they get hung up just on the carbon, and they don't realize the full system and the effect that the carbon has on not only on the atmosphere, but the way that the atmosphere reduces their heat by giving it to the oceans, and the effect that heat has on the oceans in terms of creation and feeding storms, hurricanes, etc. Is not only that, but affecting the ability of a lot of the shellfish to be able to make their shells and retain their shells. So it's all a big system, and we just need to take a look at all of that together, and then just really push ourselves into a new normal that I think will be better in the long run.
And as we're speaking today, there's actually a climate meeting, right, going on President Biden, a lot of the representatives from all really the major players, right?
Oh yeah.
China's president, everybody's in on that. I heard it was a Zoom call, which seems odd.
It,
That
it, it
and
is.
it is, right? It's a Zoom call,
It's a
and I
Zoom
always thought,
call.
yeah,
And I mean, I haven't really focused too much on it, but what I did focus on, I mean, it's got like 50 or so people. And I think that even Pope Francis was supposed to be on the call, and Vladimir Putin's on the call, and a variety of other people around the world. So that's going to be quite something. But I think Biden's going to be coming out with some very aggressive carbon reduction goals for the United States to sort of kick us back into the game a little bit. So
yeah. That's the rumor is that he's going to almost cut or double the cuts, right, that were originally
yeah,
proposed in the Obama administration.
yeah, 50% reduction by
Yeah.
the end of the decade. I think based on I want to say it's 2005 levels. I can't
I think it
remember.
was, yeah, 2005 levels,
Yeah,
which
so
that's aggressive. That's aggressive.
very
But I mean,
aggressive.
again,
Yeah.
for us to get there, a lot of it, what do I think one of the steps, right, is we have to kind of defossil fuel our world a little bit. Yeah. And that's
I,
tough, right? People, there's a lot of money not wanting us to do that. And there's just a lot of resistance to, you know, approaching things differently.
Well, we don't like change. Human beings don't like change. I mean, when we moved from horse and buggy to the automobile, they didn't like that. Moving to the locomotive, they didn't like that.
Right.
There are a lot of people, but when you go into the coal country and you talk to a lot of the people there now, coal has diminished, but
Yeah.
it has diminished by for other reasons as well. I mean, there's a lot of community, there's a lot of moms out there that don't want their sons to live their careers inside a coal mine.
Yeah,
Like
why the hell would you want that as bringing coal back? I've never understood that concept. Why
it
would you
does.
want that as your future? It's
Yeah,
not a
you
good
don't.
future.
You don't. And if you look at a lot of the community colleges in and up Appalachia, they're now taking a lot of those kids growing up in that area, and they're getting them involved in other activities and other areas of performance. So and renewables, as I said, has really been going crazy. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that as we move forward.
Yeah, and you as you mentioned, change is scary, right? So is extinction.
But yeah,
I mean, the reason that we have fossil fuels is like the predecessors whose bodies and both vegetative and animal forms, are not here anymore.
right.
There's a reason.
But again, if you look at the renewable energy industry, and primarily it's hydrothermal and wind and solar, they are growing so rapidly that they're going to be attracting a lot of other entrepreneurs and others that want to get in on that side of the game. And I think when that starts to happen, I think you're going to see a steady shift away from the fossil fuel more towards renewables. And as I mentioned, I mean, the pandemic, as horrible as it's been, has sort of given us a sneak preview of what things could be like should we do that and go in that direction. So it's going to be a long haul. It's going to be fraught with all kinds of controversy and arguments and such. But again, the young kids will carry the torch.
I mean, it's true. Yeah, during when there was diminished travel, diminished manufacturing going on, especially in places like India, you did see a real high reduction in the PM 2.5 outdoor levels. Obviously, right? Because less fossil fuel being utilized then. But it still seems like there's we in the industrialized world like the United States have the luxury of having financial resources to make change, but it's not quite as simple for some third world countries that are kind of on the cusp of industrializing, and their options really to go to a more costly initiatives is tough for them, right? I mean,
It's tough for them, and I think you also have people out there that have actually found their way into the industrialized world, and they have developed their societies and their cultural development around new industries, sort of like the way that we were back in the 1930s and 40s, as we really were, coming through the industrial age. And so, trying to get them to slow down what is something that they have found to be favorable. And to look at some of these other approaches is equally difficult to do as people who just can't seem to get the right foothold to get moving on it.
It's a challenge, and I think somehow the industrialized nations have to it's this carrot and stick approach. You can't threaten them and say they have to do this stuff. You have to incentivize and make it possible for them to actually reach those things. Because certainly, if we were to, greatly reduce or eliminate coal for our electric production, if a bunch of other countries just start ramping up their coal use,
Yeah.
we're not, there's no net benefit there, right?
Yeah.
This has to be global.
We had that. We had that, especially with mercury. When we were dealing with mercury, we've done a fairly good job. In fact, I think when I was at EPA, we had like a 99% reduction in mercury levels coming out of medical waste incinerators and things of that nature. But you still have a lot of mercury use over in Brazil and other countries. And once that little puppy gets up into the atmosphere, it will globetrot. I mean, it will find its way everywhere. So you do have that, but I don't know. I guess, Bob, the way I look at this a lot is that if you look at other facets of who we are, if you look in the IT industry, if you look in the communications industry, you look at all of these others, the fact that we're on Zoom right now doing this wonderful call, the advancement that we have seen in a lot of these other aspects, that advancement can be felt too in some of the more sluggish manufacturing processes and such. It will come. It may just take a while, but it will come. And I think you'll start to see a lot. I mean, just the fact that we're all going to be driving electric cars in the next 20 years.
Yeah, I mean,
But that brings with it other issues too.
we still need electricity.
Well,
Like if you're charging your electric car with coal,
exactly.
fired power plant generated electricity,
exactly. Or at the end of life of those little puppies, you got this huge battery, and you have to figure out what you're going to do. I know the automotive industry is thinking about that right now.
Sure.
And
I guess most of them are starting to get old. I have a Prius that's 6 years old now.
There you go. But the thing is, and as this is one of the things that I'm working on right now through my consulting business, is I'm working here with the state of Maryland about that whole waste paradigm. We're working right now with the governor's office has an executive order dealing with moving from a traditional waste kinds of processes to a sustainable materials management process where waste becomes marketable materials. And so one of the things we're working with is there a way of taking a lot of those batteries from the automotive sector and turn them into marketable products once they are torn down and processed and at the end of the life. So that's again part of the system. You have to have that sustainable materials management concept and way of looking at things and break away from some of the traditional landfill types of approaches. A lot of companies out there are very proud to say that they're landfill free now. That's a goal in their various strategies and visions. And so I think that's important, is that it will move us in the right direction. There'll always be problems, but it will move us in the right direction.
No, and that's huge. And you mentioned, so you've been on your own in the private sector consulting now, right? You have your firm. You're based in Ocean City, Maryland.
Yes.
So do you? I know we met at a conference. That was actually how we met, right? You were out as a consultant several years ago.
Yep.
And you were dealing with recycling mercury, right, from thermostats, right?
Thermostats, yeah. It's really interesting because when I left the agency, and I think this holds true for a lot of people that I've met in my travels in the environmental side, is that there's a certain passion that you have that you carry with you, and it never really goes away. And when I left EPA, I immediately set up a consulting, not knowing what I would consult on, but I've had the luxury of working on mercury-containing thermostats. I've worked with the Department of Commerce here in Maryland on some of the work they've done with local manufacturing. And like I mentioned earlier, right now I'm working with the state of Maryland on the sustainable materials management approach, where we're trying to bring people together around that. So, a lot of people when I left said, you're retiring, right? And I said, no, not really, but I'm not working certainly at the level I was when I was with federal service, but it's been rewarding, and I'll probably keep it going for a while longer.
Good. Well, hopefully you keep writing for the magazine too. I know I corralled you into that at that. I believe it was an HBC show. I
It
think
was,
we
and
met at
you know, and I'm
Philadelphia, right? Was it 16?
it was, yes, and
Time flies. It's 5 years ago.
it was, and I'm glad you did because I thoroughly enjoy it. I mean, it's difficult every once in a while to get just that right concept to talk or topic to talk about, but I hope that next month I'll be able to put something in there about what's happening today. On Earth Day and all the different things that we'll be rolling out, but it's been very good, very rewarding. I'm glad that we had that conversation.
Yeah, it was fantastic. So I'd like to invite all of our virtual studio audience, turn your cameras on. Stay muted, please, until you're asking a question. But turn your cameras on. Let's see your lovely faces. This is the exciting part of the show. And I know some of you are shy and don't want to turn your cameras on, but you really should. Um, I have a question while we're getting this up and looking for our first set of audience questions. Because it seems like, and this drives me insane, by the way. It seems like we have politicized the topic of climate change in the United States more so than other countries in the industrialized world. Like it seems like science here becomes a political issue. How do you see any way that we can get this thing to not be partisan nonsense and we work together? How do we do that?
It's a challenge. I mean, if you remember the good old monster movies back in the 1950s, I mean, it was always what? It was always the military and the politicians versus the scientists. You're trying to get rid of the giant ants or whatever it was that they were being
Sometimes
attacked.
Godzilla was the good guy. It really depends on the movie,
monsters and turned out to be the good guys. I really don't know the answer to that. I think that we will always have folks on the Hill with special interests that they just want to avoid the science when it's basically staring them in the face. That's just going to happen. I think that again, as environmental improvement, as scientific developments become embedded even deeper in the business case in corporations, I think the corporations will be the ones that will be pushing for change. One of the things that happened while I was at EPA, what was rather interesting, when corporations really picked up on the whole idea of sustainability, the conversation between them and us changed a little bit. They began to say to us, you are standing in our way in terms of getting to our sustainability goals. And when we asked why, the answer was, well, we still have to comply with a definition or a regulation or a standard that you guys put in place back in the 1970s. And when Obama was president, we tried to, all the federal agencies were asked to go back and look at all of those legacy statutes and regulations and stuff and to change them or get rid of them. It's very hard to do. But that was basically providing an impediment for the corporations. And so we started change, like the definition of solid waste was one I can remember. We actually changed the definition to help corporate America. And the other thing that they wanted is they said, you guys have all the data. You guys are rich in data and we need that data. And so we would provide the data to them, and because they were moving. And so as they move, I think we'll see a lot of movement on the Hill. And I think the states, as they move, and they have been considerably, we're going to see a lot of movement on the Hill. And then finally, as I keep harping on, over the course of time, a lot of these young kids are going to be running for office. And I think we're going to start seeing some radical change when they get into office. So there's hope out there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not totally pessimistic, but I'm alarmed. I'm alarmed, I think, and reasonably alarmed to the extent that I believe this is really, we're running out of time to be playing around with this issue. We have to take action. So anyway, with that, we have our first audience question. Terry Sofer, one of our regulars on the show. Terry, I'll give you the mic and please pose your question.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us, Mr. Murray, and I commend you for your long public service career at EPA.
Thank you.
in the early versions of what we call sustainability movement, the focus was on recycling with virtually little, if any, consideration of whether the recycled products were healthy for humans or the planet. What's your assessment of whether the current sustainability concepts are equally focused on healthy outcomes?
Well, you're always going to, as you move along these lines and you try new things, you're going to stumble over a few things, and I'm sure that we will. One of the interesting things that has happened, Perry, is the recycling concept per se is starting to lose a little bit of its steam. A lot of states and communities are finding it very costly to maintain their recycling. In fact, where I am in Ocean City, Maryland, we don't have a recycling program anymore. It all goes into a Covanta facility and is basically burned, and they create energy from it. And that has its own good things and bad things. The latest conversation that's happening out there is one focused on the whole cradle to cradle concept, or taking materials, creating products from those materials so that at the end of life, they can become, once again, marketable items. And I think that's where we're going. It's if you can conceive of a particular kind of process where you can, I'm jesting a little bit here, but if you were to take an automobile and stick it down into a flux capacitor kind of a thing, and at the end you get all of these bins full of materials that you could actually use again. That's going to be something we're going to see. I mean, and for some problematic items like diapers and mattresses, which a lot of people, mattresses, they like to leave on the side of the road still. We're going to start seeing a lot of that material being built better and processed better. And then at the end, we're going to see materials that can come out and be used for other things. Now, will there be problems associated with all of that? Probably. There may, I don't know what they might be, but we would likely see something like that. But I think it's definitely the way to go, and it gets us away from some of the issues we're having with recycling right now.
What's interesting, you raise that issue about recycling, and I always was I have and still have been a very staunch recycler in my own world. But what's frustrating to me is where we live in New York, it's all single stream recycling.
Yeah.
And, that's really problematic, as you know, because single stream recycling pretty much means you get glass smashed up, inside of your cardboard, which means, everything gets mixed together. And what I've read is upwards of 70% of what we've in good faith recycled ends up in the landfill anyway. How do we get around that? I mean, do we have to go to multi-stream recycling? Because that's how it started.
Either multi-stream recycling, or you have a process where you could throw all kinds of stuff into it. The process itself will pull everything apart, send it down disparate streams, and then at the end you may have everything that came out of the plastic stream, everything that came out of the rubber, whatever, and refined in a way that it can be reused. I think that's where we're going. But yeah, it's and that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of communities are having difficulties with recycling, because it's the cost to get through a lot of that. It's just not been working out very well.
What's also been problematic is we don't really have sources to offload it to, right? China was buying tons of our recycled plastic and materials, but they were accepting stuff that was relatively contaminated, right? A lot of people throw stuff in the recycle bin that's full of Hershey syrup or whatever. Not to pick on Hershey's, but dirty containers, and that stuff pretty much when you do that, you almost ensure it's going to end up in a landfill.
Yeah, you do, and I'm pleased to see there's a commercial running right now on TV where the three major cola bottling companies are talking about the fact that they're recycling their bottles, and they're coming out with the beads at the end that they can use to make more bottles. But one of the things that they mentioned in that commercial, which is interesting, is it used to be that the cap was not recycled. You had to remove each and every single cap from the recycling stream. But now they're saying that even the cap can be used to recycle their bottles, which is it's a small step, but it sort of gets to the issue you're talking about, is that there are problems and each one has to be addressed. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's actually a large step, but like just like as I was mentioning, back in the '70s when, yeah, I hate to even mention this, but I had friends that would literally, first of all, be driving with open beers in their car, in the
Yeah.
'70s, and then
Yeah.
throwing the bottles out the freaking window, which I would lose my mind with them back then for two reasons,
Yeah.
but mainly throwing the trash out the window, and that was prior to the bottle bill in New York.
Yeah.
One of my good friends was involved heavily working with NYPIRG, getting that initial one through.
Yeah.
And, I at the time I was like, this isn't going to make any difference. But, lo and behold, that 5 cents actually got a lot of people to stop throwing their bottles out.
It really does, and it does help. One of the things they're doing here in Ocean City, which is interesting, is that you can imagine a lot of people sit on the beach and smoke cigarettes, and then they just throw the butts in the sand. They have now set up a process, and again, you need people to make this happen, and we got good people here. They set up a process now where they have these dispensers everywhere where you can put actually like containers, I guess, rather than dispensers. You put the bud in there, and then they actually have found a company that can take all of that material and they actually make marketable products from it. And so your butt today might be a picnic bench next year. It's sort of interesting. But again, it takes a lot of creative thinking, and every once in a while, one of these ideas will catch on.
Terry, you have a follow-up? I'll give you the mic again. You'll have to. No, you don't have a follow-up? You made a follow-up comment. You don't want to. Just it's okay. It was in the commentary, so I was thinking you might want to be there. So, Tom, you have that long history at EPA. I mean, really almost from the inception, right? 6 months after it was founded to 2016. So almost not quite the entire history of EPA under your belt working there. What do you have general impressions from, like how things may have changed? I mean, a 44-year run. Initially we started with rivers on fire, right? And things got better. I mean, I think as a child too, like my family's from Metro New York area, and I remember, and I lived in upstate, and I remember driving down and seeing the Manhattan skyline, and a lot of times you couldn't see it, right? It was so hazy and just awful back in the '70s. The odor was just terrible, especially driving across by Secaucus, New Jersey, which still doesn't smell that great, but it's definitely better. But then seeing the difference, like, decades later of, seeing a clear New York City skyline. I mean, as far as the Clean Air Act, we made some headway.
We have. I mean, we've had in so many areas. I mean, even in the area that you probably work with more is in the pesticides area. If you just think about, I mean, back in the '70s, DDT, we still had DDT out there. Rachel Carson's book dealt with that. And so there's been a lot of new developments in just the registration of pesticides and the testing of pesticides and things of that nature. Water quality, I think, has improved considerably over the years. A lot of that came through compliance and enforcement of NPDES permits and things of that nature. And you had stumbles every once in a while where there'd be a spill that would have to be dealt with. I remember too, in the latter part of the time I was there, in solid waste issues and things like that, when Superfund was first coming online. One of the issues that we dealt with, and I wrote about this in one of the snippets recently, is that a lot of these sites were basically covered over. And that years later, parks, school grounds, things like that were actually built on top of it. And reports started coming in that kids were getting sick. And so some of the NASA satellite photography that we did back in the early '70s, we were able to go back and actually look at that parcel of land as it was back in the '70s and compare it to the current day at the time. And we found that it was in fact a Superfund site, and it was actually stuff in the soil that was causing the problems. That type of thing where you can actually find a solution, find a problem, get a solution and correct it, was very rewarding, and it happened, I think, more often than not over the course of the years. I did a lot of work with toxic chemicals like dioxins and mercury and PCBs and things of that nature, CFCs. And so again, industry they are required by law that if they find anything, any chemical in the human body through their testing, they have to report it to the EPA. And so the work that we saw with PFOS and PFOA came to the agency that way. And it helped create a program all to itself where over the course of time, we worked with industry to get rid of that. I mentioned mercury in the healthcare area. You cannot find, I remember, I'll give you a little anecdotal story that I love to tell about mercury. I was invited to the National Institutes of Health to meet with a bunch of medical doctors about mercury and the environmental effects of mercury. And we're sitting around a table, and all of these old, wise medical doctors were listening intently to what I was saying. And this one guy, this one doctor, just sort of gruffly said to me, in no easy way, he says, "You're an idiot." And I said, "Why is that?" And he says, "What you don't realize is that mercury is our gold standard. We use it to calibrate every piece of equipment we use in the medical field." And I said, "Yeah, I'm aware of that." And I said, "I'm just suggesting that maybe we find something else." And so the conversation went on and got nowhere. And finally, a guy from the Mayo Clinic basically looked at his colleague and said, "You know what? Maybe we just need a new gold standard." And you know, just a comment like that, where people realize that, you know, change could be made just by changing your view of things. And like I said, you cannot find mercury now in healthcare. You just can't. And because of they knew it was not good for human health, and so they did something about it.
I mean, that's a pretty good turnaround in the course of a conversation, going from an idiot to maybe we need a new standard. So that's you got to feel at least somewhat successful with that.
Yeah,
right?
somewhat successful, right?
So I see we have another question. Tom, you have a question?
Well, I've been struggling to ask one, and I think it just came up from the last example. I'm fascinated with our guest because my wife just retired after 30 years in FEMA. Her mother's passing was on Earth Day many years ago. And here is someone who was at the beginning. We have the same length of career, 45 years. So my question is connected to care and leadership of the students, but it goes to something deeper than we usually talk about. In education, we talk about environment all the time. In fact, we talk about safe learning environment, orderly environment, professional environment, secure environment. And what we really mean is what's going on in the schools. Maybe this is more with the indoors part. But the part that I've been working on 25 years is to get safe, clean, hygienic restrooms for students, bathrooms for students that they will use. So my question is to Tom, to not think as a public servant, but as a thoughtful bureaucrat in the best sense of the word. How do we get kids to care about a taboo subject, which is right in their own backyard, when they do care about something as global as global warming, but they can't get doors on the stalls in their bathrooms?
It's a very good point. The first answer I would give to you is that a day like today, Earth Day, is a perfect kind of day to get together with your local school districts and even your local schools and come up with ideas like that, where if you can get some of the kids to say, okay, next Earth Day, we want to focus on why it is that, you know, I don't know, pick whatever it is, don't have the right doors on the bathrooms. And then put together sort of a project to talk about it, talk to the community leaders about it, talk to the school system about it, whatever, as part of sort of a project, whether it be done on Earth Day or not. I think sort of on the example that you gave, Tom, which is sort of interesting, is that I think this crazy pandemic that we've been living through in many ways is going to create new ways of and new methodologies for keeping things clean in schools and other buildings. I think that will be part of our new normal going forward. But I think it just gets back to, and you probably know this as well as I do, it gets back to basic communication with kids. I had a conversation with a young girl named Ella who called me and said that she was getting ready to go off to college and wanted to do something in the sustainability world, and she had no idea what to do and where to go. And she says, some people say I should go to work for EPA. Other people say I should stay in academia. And so we talked about what it is that was really bothering her in her world. And I think where we left it was that she was going to look to an industry that she had an interest in, but look at it from a sustainability point of view and see if she could cut a career in that area. But she was interested, just like you were suggesting, she was interested not only in the global perspective, but she's right now working with kids in high school, putting together things. It's so cool. She's put together this iPod or whatever it's called, which she gets all these kids together, and they're doing like what we're doing right now. They're talking to people about issues that are of concern to them. And there's another part of new normal. Let's use Zoom. Let's get kids together and in your class, and let's talk about how we can solve these issues. And you get, the teacher on there, and you get an administrator on there, and let's talk about it.
I loved your first suggestion because 5 years ago, I doubt anyone would know that, but we could look at it in a future article or session. The United Nations declared World Toilet Day, November 19th for the last 5 years has been celebrated. But in this country, we just flush and forget. We don't think about our needs in sanitation and citizenship. And that's part of what Bob was talking about. It's a citizenship problem if you throw a bottle out of a car, and it's a societal consequence. But we've had World Toilet Day for 5 years.
I've never heard of that, to be honest.
That's my point. That's my point. QED.
Yeah, it's held in Flushing Meadows, New York, right? That's a joke.
Yeah, that was a bad joke, but it worked.
It was a good joke.
Just wrap that up, Tom, because your example there of the flushing toilet and where it goes, that would be a perfect topic for a bunch of school kids to take on that issue and to actually, through pictures, show where that all goes, how much water is used, and everything else. And because you're right, that awareness is never out there. We tend to be, especially Americans, as Bob was saying, you just use it, you toss it, use it, toss it, whatever, you flush it, whatever. And we need to think differently about it.
We tend to do that with everything, right? We go to fast food, which, I travel a bit, so you get stuck eating fast food, and you just see how everything's over packaged, especially now, with the pandemic. Now there's nothing, you don't touch anything, so everything's all disposable, and it's just like we really do waste and generate a lot of waste per person in this country.
Oh, we do. It's amazing.
No way around it. Tom, so we're getting to that point. We're almost out of time. So I guess I wanted to give you an opportunity to give us kind of your final thoughts. What we may not have covered here in our brief 60 minutes together. I'd like to just give your final thoughts on Earth Day and your outlook for the future, I guess.
I think that what I've been thinking about a lot, and a lot of it's been driven more by the pandemic than anything else, Bob, is that we have learned a lot over the last year about ourselves and about the society we live in, what we do, how we do it. We need to really take seriously the concept of a new normal. We are so, as humans, we just do this. We always want to slide back to the way things were, the comfort zones that we all had. I think, when we come out of the new normal, some things will obviously just happen naturally because we found that we needed it and could use it, like making sure that the toilets at a local school are clean for the kids. But I think people in all walks of life, especially those in the manufacturing world and corporate world, they really do need to take a look and say, maybe this is the time to maybe change the footprint of our manufacturing process so we're not wasting as much energy or wasting a lot of motion or things of that nature, and refine what we do and improve what we do and buy the better materials and look more sustainably. Now's the time to do it because we've had that moment, that pause. And I think if there was one message to everybody on the call is that start thinking about the new normal is really truly a new normal. and change is good and can be good. And we now have an idea of what it's like when it's not good. And so I think that's my final message to everybody.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I'm going to, do a final plug out for what we do with the show here. Healthy Indoors, the Healthy Indoors live show is obviously a production of Healthy Indoors magazine. So you could get what's great. We have our mothership, right? Is healthyindoors.com, and those of you watching the show are probably aware of it, or maybe not. Healthyindoors.com is where all of our back issues, 8 years plus of the magazine resides. You can also get to back episodes of the Healthy Indoors broadcast that we've been doing, as well as our audio podcast recordings. And most recently, we've added the Healthy Indoors online global community, which again is in the final beta stages. We're going to be launching it publicly very soon. What this is an online platform that will allow you to network and engage with other people of like interest. So a totally dedicated indoor environmental platform where issues on indoor air quality, sustainability, all that stuff will take place. It'll be an opportunity to meet with other professionals around the globe, also share information, view online event broadcasts, repository of all of our materials from both the magazine and the show, as well as a lot of other trusted content providers. And we'll be adding more and more as we go. So we're really looking forward to that full-fledged launch really in the next week or two. And encourage you to take an opportunity to click on it and check it out. So with that, Tom, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. And I know, like early on, we had conversations, back at conferences back from 16. I think we crossed paths at 2 or 3 events over a short period of time.
Yeah.
And there were some of the best multi-hour conversations I ever had at a conference. I'll be honest with you. I know I sat in the trade show with you with a cup of coffee, just going on, and you just have just this. It's just a great overview of everything. Your knowledge and experience. I'm in awe of it, to be honest. All you've done.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I greatly appreciate what you do for us at Healthy Indoors, writing that monthly column. So best of luck with everything that you're doing. And again, you're still. Tom is Tom Murray Environmental Consulting in Ocean City, Maryland. Doing environmental sustainability stuff. You're never going to retire, are you?
I probably won't. Yeah.
Can't bring yourself to retiring.
No.
That's a good thing, though, right?
Yeah, if the ocean's just about 10 feet away, eventually I'll go out there, tie a line to my toe, and sit there and fall asleep, I guess. But we'll see when that day comes.
You'd mentioned Hemingway. It's like
yeah.
There you go. Well, I best of luck with with your authoring. Is that the right term? Writing, I guess.
Writing. Yes. Authoring, whatever.
Yeah. Anyway, well, with that, always a pleasure, my friend. Keep doing what you're doing. I just love it, and we'll talk again soon. No question about it. So I guess we're at that time again, everyone. So we're going to bid adieu for the Healthy Indoors show and Healthy Indoors magazine. I'm Bob Krell. Please stay healthy, stay safe, stay happy. We'll see you guys again next Thursday.